Mr. Chair, you're alive.
Welcome to the October 12th Annapolis Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. First order of business is the roll call, please, Kimberly.
Mr. Klein,
Present.
Ms. Pico,
Present.
Mr. Waldman,
Present.
Mr. Imes,
Here.
Mr. Sale.
Here.
We're not expecting Ms. Butler or Mr. Svakianudis. Mr. Chairman, we have 5 members present.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, first order of business is the approval of the agenda, and I'm going to share this real quick. So there's one change that I want to propose that we make, and I apologize that I didn't catch this earlier, but under new business, we have 2223 on first reader. This actually should be a public hearing, so I would entertain a motion. Well, we should have a motion to approve the agenda, then we can have discussion. So let's have a motion to.
I'll make a motion that we discuss it.
Okay, second.
Second.
Okay, so the discussion, I already started that I think we should move that 2223 up to, it's really a public hearing. So
And why
I'll
does it
make
say
that-
first reader? We never write stuff like that on ours. Are we starting to do that? Or is that just a copy and paste from
probably,
agendas of
probably
the
a
council?
copy and paste, but it's a public it's a public.
Was it advertised as a public hearing though? Can we do that is what I'm asking you.
Yeah,
The
I
agenda went out
believe
to
it
everybody.
was.
Okay. Yeah, it was advertised as a
Okay.
public hearing, it's just in the wrong place on the agenda. So I move that we move it up to public hearings. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion further?
Yeah, I was saying, can we do that, or was it advertised as not as a public hearing?
Eric said it was advertised as a public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So okay, so I'm just wondering how many people just look at the agenda and say, oh, it's not a public hearing. Okay, if it's legal, then I'm fine with it.
Yeah, well, also, based on our standard process for remote meetings, it'll be held open until the next meeting, so people
I
will have
understand.
a chance to comment if they want to. Okay, so all in favor of moving that, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstention? Okay, so there, and now all in favor of the agenda as amended, say aye.
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 Any abstentions or opposed? Okay. Not hearing any, the agenda is approved as shown here, or as discussed. Next order of business is approval of minutes from September 21st. Does anybody want me to display those, or have everybody had a chance to read them? Basically a recap of.
I read the minutes, but I was not at the meeting, and nor could I see a video of the last meeting, even though I searched all the YouTube files for it. Maybe I'm an idiot.
It's I have found finding the ones you have to go under the tab on YouTube for the Annapolis Boards and Commissions under the tab that says live recordings, and they're all there chronologically. That's how I've found them typically. But
I went there and looked, and I couldn't find ours. I'll go look again though,
Oh.
to be sure.
okay. Anyway, the majority of the minutes recapped our discussion on the public comments from the closing of the public hearing and on the comprehensive plan, and the discussion of the comments from the public, and all of those comments were entered into the record, and the decision to have at this meeting Eric come and present the changes based on these comments. And we did take some, 3 people, live testimony from 3 people. But if everybody's had a chance to review those, I would entertain a motion to approve as sent to us.
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? I'm not hearing any. All in favor of the minutes as written, say aye.
I have to abstain.
Okay, David abstains. Thank you. Okay, so minutes are approved.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman, clarification is Mr. Sale an abstention as well?
Yep. I had to abstain as well
Okay,
because I wasn't here for it. So I wouldn't know if anything was incorrect.
Oh, boy, so if we have 3.
So it brings, but you have majority of who
We
you
have
have
majority
here.
of the
So it's
quorum,
looking
so
good.
that's okay, yeah,
We've had this problem before.
yeah. So 3 yes, 2 abstentions is a majority of the quorum, so we're okay. They're approved. Okay, great. Okay, so now we're on to the public hearing. So this is the item that's on tap here is 2223 business taxes, license and regulation, and creation of art establishment beer and wine license for the purpose of creating a City of Annapolis beer and wine license for specific art venues authorized by the Maryland Alcoholic Beverage Code, Section 10-1002 per House Bill 353, Senate Bill 473, signed by Governor Westmore on May 3rd, 2023, and generally related to alcoholic beverages, chapter of the city code. So we got a staff report from Mr. Lashinsky that hopefully everybody's read. And I sent around the link on the Legistar site that has all of the documentation on this, that includes the staff report to the city council, the actual legislation, and, as marked up in the various parts of the code. So Eric, are you going to make a short presentation on this, or?
I actually was not planning on it, but I'm happy just to give an overview of it's pretty straightforward legislation. The staff report was very brief. But for the record, Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning. To be honest, I was a little surprised this was referred to Planning Commission, but so the legislation, it really is just implementing a bill that was passed at the General Assembly that is very specific to Annapolis, and it's a provision to allow for a new annual beer and wine license for nonprofit art establishments. So there's several nonprofit art establishments in the city that would be able to take advantage of this. And then the reason for this legislation is that, these venues typically strapped for funds. They spend a lot of money on individual permits for every event they do to get a temporary beer and wine license. It's not the most efficient process. And by doing an annual license, they can just expedite the process. It would reduce the city staff process workload, free up some more funds for these institutions to spend on their programming and fulfill their missions, and ultimately that benefits their audiences and city residents. So that's really the intent here. There was a resolution, a companion to this ordinance that set the fee, and that's $1,000 a year for the annual license. And that was sent around as well with the staff report and the ordinance. So it is pretty straightforward. The language, frankly, just reflects the language that came from the state and that got put into the state land alcoholic beverage article. So,
Does anybody have specific questions for
I
Erica?
do. Eric, just in reading through what's been proposed and the language change, and maybe I missed it, but nowhere in this language does it limit the sale of alcohol to during an event, right? It really just classifies the nonprofit organization as an art establishment that has the ability to sell alcohol on premise for on-premise use pretty much during the hours of any other permit.
That's a good point.
I just want to make sure I understand that it's not limited, because from the language I'm reading, I don't see anything that says, during on-site events. It just says all the time.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, but I think that there's some other maybe some other provisions in the code that it's not you would have to have a permitted bar restaurant, I think, to serve the alcohol at non-event times. I mean, I'm not 100% sure. That's just what I'm thinking. Let me see. I mean, I don't have the
I mean, I understand the intention. I get the intention.
yeah. No, it's a good point, and it may be worth if it's not in the ordinance, it may be a good comment to submit, because I mean that's why it's here, I guess. And I see.
Yeah, I had
see-
essentially the same comment. It mentioned in a couple of places about hours, but then it doesn't actually specify any hours. And
It
So
it
it-
refers back to the hours of which an applicable permit for that specific sale item would normally apply. It just extends to this kind of situation or scenario. This
yeah,
is
David, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I do have my hand up for a couple of reasons. First of all, I thought we had looked at this once before as a result of the Shakespeare Company wanting to do something a while ago, a number of years ago, that they wanted to be able to sell alcohol. Is that what this stems from, first of all? And the second thing is, being part of the Annapolis Summer Garden Theater. Now, we're right downtown, but we don't want to really sell alcohol because of safety, because we're on rocks, in the Summer Garden Theater, and we don't have enough bathrooms and the whole 9 yards. But would this allow us to basically say, hey, it's a lighted boat parade. Let's have an open house and sell alcohol here and play some music in the background? Would it allow us to open it up during boat show, for example, in the middle of the day? There's a lot of things that we could do with it. If it's what you call an event. Is it a performance?
Yeah, David, the way I read this language, yes, you would be allowed to anytime, all day, 24/7, as long as it's within live performances, musical act, dinner performances, because this language doesn't specifically restrict to specific event times or specific events. It just says, here's a blanket.
Yeah,
permit.
if we were going to sell alcohol, the best time for us to do it would be not during our performances at Annapolis Summer Garden Theater. Like we're having, we're going to be playing, what is it? Jimmy Buffett's Escape to Margaritaville for 5 weeks next summer. And we're not selling alcohol for that event, even though everybody's going to be like, where's the alcohol?
I mean,
We're
we'd
not
have to
selling
dig in, right? We'd have to dig in deeper into the language,
Yeah.
but just on a first pass, that would probably be my biggest question, is because it refers back to the actual code, as far as what the restrictions of the permit is. By extending those same requirements to an art establishment, it gives the license holder an article, 7.12.278, which is on page 3 of the ordinance. It says, this applies to art establishments, and the license holder is authorized to sell beer, wine at retail for on-premise consumption during the hours and days set for beer and wine licenses by the city, period. So if that is, 7 to 7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week or whatever it may be, that would also apply to these establishments if granted.
Yeah, and I basically, the scenario, it's a little different than the one David mentioned, but scenario I had is, how there are exhibits that are ongoing at Maryland Hall all the time that are just, they rotate through different artists displaying different things. And that all qualifies, but given there's something sort of happening there all the time, what prevents Maryland Hall from becoming essentially a social club?
Well, I can, it's funny that this is coming up and you just said that, because Dan Collin is the operations guy over at Maryland Hall. And I was talking to him about 3 months ago about all the potholes and how we're going to try to get the county to help him out. And they did. But while we're sitting in his office, he brought up the fact that I was like, well, how's business going here? How's it going for you guys? He goes, man, ticket sales are way down. He goes, because ever since COVID, people figured out that, you know, rather than go to the performance, we started live streaming all of our performances. So people are now having parties at their houses like they did during COVID, because they can drink beer and wine at their houses and they're not coming here and buying tickets. They're just watching the live stream at home. He goes, so our ticket sales are suffering. He goes, we're actually having a big financial problem. I said, you're kidding me. He goes, no. And he goes, so we've been starting to get these permits to try to sell beer and alcohol, do something to try to get the patrons back in here. I was like, okay. And he goes, how's that working? He goes, well, it's just a big hassle. We got to do it for every performance. We can't just get a carte blanche clearance. He goes, so we're looking and trying to work with city reps and county reps to see if we can get a longer clearance to have the, you know, permit for a long period of time. And I just heard that, and I remembered it from 2.5, 3 months ago. And now I see this and I'm like, that's probably where this is coming from, is because they got sick and tired of asking for the permits over time. And oh, by the way, their reasoning when I was sitting in his office and we weren't even talking about me being on planning commission or anything. This was totally about other stuff. And I guess maybe they are hurting on ticket sales for people just having the parties at their house still, you know, but I don't know. Maybe I can call them and have them step in for public comment next meeting, or one of those guys. Do we have
Yeah,
anybody?
Just for clarity, though, this is based specifically on the House and Senate bill that was signed by the governor on May 3rd of this year. So I'm not sure about timing or in
Yeah.
genesis of all this, but this was signed, 7 months ago.
Yeah, that's enabling legislation, but I certainly understand the intent of this, and I agree with it. I think every time you're going to have a concert and you want to serve, a glass of wine at intermission or whatever, if you have to get a permit every time you do that's regulation that's out of control. But so I have no problem with the blanket permit, but it just seems pretty open-ended the way this is.
Yeah, it does.
My read of all of this seems pretty open-ended, especially if you're talking about, visual art that hangs on a wall 24/7. Like you could basically kind of open a beer and wine bar at Maryland Hall that people could go into and then walk around. And maybe that's okay. I don't know, but it seems a little beyond what the intent was.
Well, they already have like a little cafe, and they were that was part of their talking, was that
I
too.
know.
So yes, what you're saying.
So it seems a little broad to me, because that starts to sound like a bar and not a performance or artistic presentation space. So
I think
I know we're
maybe
we shouldn't really be deliberating here. So we're asking questions, really, Eric. If you have,
Yeah, the only other thing I think you bring up a great point. The only other thing I think Teresa may have already mentioned it, but the part of the ordinance, that provides the most light on this is that 7.12.278, C, where it says the license holder is authorized to sell or serve beer and wine at retail for on-premises consumption during the hours and days set for beer and light wine licenses by the City of Annapolis Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. And so to me, that suggests that there might be some other rules in play here, but that it's certainly a good comment to submit.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, certainly. So we're, according to our procedure, so we'll in a second here open the public hearing, and we'll leave it open for till next meeting. We'll close it out and decide, what we're gonna submit for comments on it at the next meeting. But so my question for you, Eric, and maybe this is something you could get us an answer on, is 7.12.278C. Is there anything, what that seems pretty open? Is there more behind that curtain? That's what I don't understand. Maybe you could get an answer for us on that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to look into that. I don't handle these licenses much, so I'm kind of learning myself, but I will find out. I'll find the answer for that.
Yeah, or if you can, I'm happy to go talk to somebody if you tell me who to talk to. I know you got a lot on your plate.
I think somebody in our current planning division would know pretty quickly what that refers to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Note of that. Okay, so at this point, I'll officially open the public hearing on 023. What is this? 02223. And if anybody from the public watches this and wishes to provide comments for the next meeting, either in person or via the web form, please do so. And those will come to us. And we will discuss those and close out the public hearing at the next meeting. Okay, so that, anybody else have anything they want to add to that? Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, to the meat of the agenda, which is under old business. It's the proposed updates to the draft comprehensive plan, based on the public comments that we discussed at the last meeting. And so Eric, why don't you take it away?
All right, let me share my screen. I have
Okay.
a relatively brief presentation. I sent the memo earlier today. Hopefully you all saw that. It was just a simple sheet, about 6 pages.
So did get that. It was a good read. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, I'm really just gonna walk through it. This is that's not the usual glamorous, lushly illustrated presentation, but I do want to go through again some of what we shared in late September when we closed the comment period. I'm here. Casey Ortiz, my colleague, is here, and he did a lot of the record keeping on this comment period. So I appreciate all the work he put in to be vigilant about tracking comments we received. We received quite a few. I think close to 200 public comments that we put into a publicly accessible spreadsheet on the website. I'm just going to go through again where the comments came, kind of the takeaways from that comment period real quick, and then go into from everything we heard, the sort of substantial changes that we think are needed to address the comments we heard. This is just showing again the number of groups of different interests, locations across the city that we were able to reach during our 90-day public comment period. And again, the state only requires 60-day comment period. We went beyond that. We really did not want to end it in mid-August, so we kind of went through September for the most part and ended on September 21st at your meeting. We did 12 meetings. Most of those were in person. We did a few online, including one with the Germantown Homewood residents, and we did 2 general webinars at the beginning. And this is just showing the number of attendees. So we had the most at this event at Mike Bush Library that was geared towards wards 1 and 2. And then we had 45 people at Mount Olive Church and Parole that was geared towards wards 3 and 4. We had a big turnout at the Heritage Community, 43 people. And that includes some folks from Parole as well. So it pulled other folks from the Forest Drive corridor. So 251 residents altogether through all those events. Where did we get the most comments? Well, we had a website up for the whole time. It's still up, AnnapolisAhead2040.com. I'm going to pull that up in a second, but that's where we really wanted people to use that website to access the plan, download it. And we had survey links for every chapter. And so, we got the most comments directly from that, but we had a lot from just direct emails, online forms like the one we use for Planning Commission. And then we had in-person comments. We had Post-it notes at those in-person events. And we got some comments just sent to us by council members, from constituents. And, not surprisingly, most of the comments were focus on land use, transportation, and environmental sustainability. It's sort of like the big three. I would say land use and transportation are just the typical meat of the comprehensive plan, no matter where you live, no matter what town or county, that's going to be the major focus. But here, I think environmental sustainability is it's important to acknowledge. That's really kind of an Annapolis thing, just given our context. So it's good to see people focusing on that. And these just represent the various chapters in the comprehensive plan, as you know, the pie slices here. And so what Casey and I did, we went through the comments we received and we coded them as one of three things. Either they're already in the plan and somebody just didn't find where it's located, perfectly understandable. A lot of comments were just beyond the scope of the plan itself. They were either too broad, they focus on something else outside of Annapolis and the county, or they were just too specific and not just, kind of Goldilocks situation. The comp plan is like a 30,000 foot view, and we do get into some specifics, but some questions were just too specific. And then some were just questions that really weren't focused on actual changes that people would like to see, or so in the end, about 18% of the comments we received from the public were ones that led to changes in the comprehensive plan. And so before I just want to pull up, and obviously I got the comments from this body at the last meeting and really appreciated the insight in those. There were some really excellent quotes that I thought of including tonight, but I spare you. But you'll see when I go through the changes that you should recognize some of the things that they weren't just from you. They were in some cases, things we had heard from other people as well. But just as a reminder to folks who might be watching, and if you go to AnnapolisAhead2040.com, it'll take you to the city's website, to our dedicated comprehensive plan page here. And this is where, you click on this and it takes you to the comment period website where we have more specifics on the chapters. If you keep scrolling down, this is where we have the comment log link, and you pull that up. It's going to take you to a live Google sheet it's locked, so people can't delete things from here, but you can see that we have this plan impact column, and that's where we were sort of tagging these comments. And we're going to be adding responses to all the comments. We've done some already, but we definitely take these seriously. And just wanted to share that again for folks who might be watching and wanted to know how we are keeping track of all these comments. So without further ado, I'm just going to go through. We have these just sort of organized by chapter for the most part. There's a couple of general updates and some map updates we wanted to share. Again, these are just substantial changes. I mean, there's certainly a lot of grammatical changes and captions to images that need to be improved, or just minor clarifications, but this is kind of the bigger stuff. And I think this is informal. Feel free to ask questions along the way. I think it'll be best if I can answer them as we're going. So this is a really big one. Obviously, this is a huge document. It's 415 pages. A lot of people were overwhelmed by it. We get it. We got this comment from a number of people to not only create an executive summary, but just, is there some sort of abridged version? And we definitely agree it should be like an action plan document. And so we're going to do an executive summary. We're going to combine that with chapter 13, which is the recommended action matrix. And that's what we were, frankly, we were telling people if they didn't want to print the whole thing, you could just print chapter 13. It was about 50 pages still, but it's kind of the summary of all the goals and recommended action. So we'll put that together, and I think that'll help a lot of people be able to digest this thing.
So you're going to sort of
Um,
create kind of
we-
like a companion. It's sort of a
Yeah.
companion or an appendix that, or
It's going to be a
appendix
companion.
sort of thing, or a companion document that's sort of cliff notes, basically.
Cliff notes. Yeah, it's going to be
For
a
those of us
companion
of a certain
document.
age.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm old enough to know what that means, but I think that the full document, I think some places the bigger document is just existing conditions analysis. And so we thought about that, but I think there's still value in having a larger document that includes everything and that somebody can just look at. But I think the companion document will be what a lot of people refer to more readily. There's a lot of minor updates to maps. Legend may not been readable, or map wasn't reproduced large enough or something like that. But there are some more substantial changes. So we got a handful of comments on the future land use map that were really good pickups. Were really important to the intent for that future land use map, and so we have made those corrections already. I just highlight one of them. Again, on this website that I just showed you, if you keep scrolling down, this is the future land use viewer tool that we released probably 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, when we first were starting to make this future land use map. If you click that, it'll open up this new window. I already opened it up, and it allows you to compare on the left the future land use map from 2009 with the one in the current plan. And we got a lot of questions about the Spa Road, the former public works facility at Spa Road, because there are recommendations in the comp plan to look at the potential for new development there that should include some type of housing, workforce housing, or some kind of mixed income housing, potentially with some other uses, maybe retail or institution, like art related. We're close to the Arts District and Maryland Hall, but it could be artist housing, et cetera. But, the concern that a lot of folks have, which is legitimate, is that this is a place where there's documented contamination from past uses. That's known. The extent of it, full extent of it, is not known, that we have not done the comprehensive testing. And that is something that the Department of Public Works is doing right now. And they are bringing a contractor on to do the phase 1 and phase 2 environmental testing. And they say in 18 months, we will know the extent of what's there that needs to be cleaned up. And so it's important when you set the regime for that testing to think about what is the ultimate use. If it's not going to be housing, then the testing doesn't go very deep into the soil. It might go a few feet. If the hope is that maybe there's some housing here, we're going to look 15 feet deep, I believe is the standard. And so you do have to think about what is the appropriate use for this site in a situation where this is a clean and developable site. And there was a city council resolution last year that was unanimous and said this would be a good site for some sort of mixed use development that includes affordable housing. It's on a major thoroughfare. It's close to a lot of conveniences. It's close to parks and schools. So what we did to clarify on the future land use map is we expanded the area that is environmental enhancement. You can see this this lime green that's closest to the creek, which is tributary to Spa Creek. The developable area is just the red area. That is that's the area that is kind of upland, closer to the roadway. It's a relatively small portion of the overall site, which includes portions of land on both sides of Spa Road. And then you can see here, this is the former Weems Whalen Field, which is already dedicated as permanent open space. That's been already treated, and there's a separate process to reactivate that field, and Public Works and Rec and Parks are working on that right now. But I'm going into more detail on this because there were a lot of questions about this, and I've just done everything I can to assure people, and we're going to clarify the language in the comp plan that there will not be any development on this site unless we can understand what's needed, the extent of any contamination, what's needed to clean it up, and it's all going to be third party validated by the Maryland Department of the Environment. So there's going to be a lot
So
of
just for my own edification, the red mixed area, that's the way to think about that. Is if you were to go and walk and take a look at that, that's really the part of the property that still has or had the Public Works buildings on it in the parking lot, and that you can sort of see.
That's
from the
right.
street.
That's
Yeah,
right.
It's
Yeah.
not all the way down to the creek as you pointed
Right.
out and stuff. It's really just what you see where there's buildings and parking lots now. That's really the extent of what would.
Yeah,
possibly
there's-
be developed.
there's a gravel lot in this kind of triangular space today that is kind of oddly located, and that really needs to be brought up. I don't, the ultimate use probably should not be gravel yard, but that's why we are coding it differently. But yeah, for the most part, the red mixed use areas are where are currently still are existing buildings, or paved impervious surfaces. So
Okay. Yeah, that all makes sense to me.
yeah. So, I'll go into, in the land use chapter, I kind of go through the various changes that were made, but they're all updated on that viewer. So if anybody wants to check that out that's watching, they'll see the updates. We're going to add an environmental context map in the introduction, just to we have already a map of how the city has grown over time, and we have a ward map, but given the importance of environmental concerns to the comp plan and just to our city geography, it made sense to kind of clarify the environmental context of the city. We're making major changes to a school zone map that shows up in the community facilities chapter. I'll talk more about that in a second. We have an open space equity map and also in the community facilities chapter that's just very confusing, and we want to clarify that because it is important. It shows where the areas of the city are that are sort of not in walking distance of certain parks, within like a 10-minute radius. We are going to make some minor modifications to the growth area map in the municipal growth chapter. And this is just more of a technicality that came to us from the Maryland Department of Planning. They have a format to this map that focuses on what they call growth tiers. And that relates more to counties. It's essentially sewer. It's a kind of a classifying land in relation to whether there's already sewer service or not, and what's needed to connect that property to the sewer system. And here in Annapolis, almost everything is already connected to the sewer. There's a few properties in our growth area that are not, but it's really just kind of a renaming and reclassifying the growth areas that we're already identifying. We're going to add a new map in the housing chapter that focuses on where the existing stock of multifamily dwellings are located, in relation to single family housing, where the age restricted housing is, sort of senior housing, and then where is the city's stock of public and subsidized housing? That's a question we got a lot, and it's fairly straightforward for us to make that. And then finally, there's a chapter called Areas of Critical State Concern that focuses on all the state funding programs that Annapolis wants to take advantage of. And the Chesapeake Crossroads Heritage Area is one of those that we fit into that. And we wanted to do a map that shows the context. So things are going to move a little faster now, but table of contents, the only change, and this is actually seems semantic, but it's actually a big deal to a lot of people. We got a lot of questions about where is historic preservation in the plan. It's throughout the plan. I had to really point that out to a lot of people. There's probably the most in the arts and culture chapter, but that wasn't intuitive. So we're going to change the title to Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation, which should help so people see that right away in the table of contents. Few additions to the glossary. This, defining historic preservation seemed like just a minor oversight, but it has a lot of consequence. The periods that are eligible for preservation and funding have grown, and we want to be clear about that. So we'll define that in the glossary. Area median income, low income housing, workforce housing, those were all recommendations from the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development to be consistent with the state definitions. So that's pretty straightforward. In the introduction, this was a comment, that it's it'll probably be in the executive summary as well, but just something that spells out what are the big ideas that, if you're it's a summary of what are the signature ideas in this comprehensive plan that really distinguish it from past comprehensive plans that kind of define the moment we're living in now in Annapolis. I don't know how many that's going to be, but I'm guessing 6 to 10 or so. We're going to add a new section that talks about what we've done since the last comprehensive plan, how we've kind of built on the last comprehensive plan, or what has happened. People wanted a little more accountability, so we're not just throwing the last one in the trash and starting a new one, which is not really accurate. We do refer to the last one a lot, and if anything, this comprehensive plan has a lot of the same goals and it has some action, but it's just a lot more comprehensive. So that's the big difference. But we're obviously dealing with new issues today that some of which didn't even exist 12 years ago. We're also, I mentioned the environmental context map already, but that's going to be in the introduction. Demographic trends. We got a number of comments particularly about the senior population in the city over 65. It's along with the Hispanic and Latino population, it's one of the fastest growing demographic groups. The questions or the comments came in that we should be more clear about how we're addressing these fast growing groups. And so we're going to do that. We're going to dive into the data that's available more in this demographic trends chapter and kind of drill down to, try to understand how to define these groups in more nuanced way, that they're not just monolithic, singular group, but they have differences. So try to understand. I think there's a lot in the plan that's already addressing needs of these two groups, but we don't want to generalize, and we want to, be able to point to some of those. Chapter 3, municipal growth. We're going to provide some more information about key themes to the city's future growth that you kind of had to read between the lines a little bit to know we're in here. And we want to be a little more forward about inclusivity, sustainability, technological integration, and connectivity, and show what those mean in context on the ground. Provide some examples. We want to talk a little bit more about what's happening outside of Annapolis, particularly the Parole Town Center and then the David Taylor Research Center. That actually came I think it was at a presentation to the Maritime Advisory Board. They were suggesting that it was appropriate to sort of say, what would Annapolis like to see at David Taylor, which has been a proposed mixed-use development across the Severn for many years that could be a really interesting asset to the area if it's ever developed. And then I mentioned, we're amending the growth areas map, just very minor ways, just frankly to rename the areas on the map and give it a new title. And so there is emphasis already on fostering inclusive economic opportunities, but we want to be more specific about what that means, what's needed to do that. And so we're going to have a new section on that to make sure that we're clear about what does the city really need to do to act on that and make sure that we have diverse entrepreneurship from underrepresented populations. In the land use chapter, we encountered this at a lot of meetings. You know, people equate the future land use map to a zoning map. They're very different. And we actually came up with a flyer that we started bringing in, a poster that we started bringing to our events. People are correct in the future land use map does guide future zoning decisions, but the actual process of rezoning is much longer process that frankly involves a lot more community involvement and will probably happen at a community level. It'll be more granular. I don't foresee us doing a full rezoning of the city. It'll be focused on specific areas. And frankly, we will probably be prioritizing areas where communities have already expressed a desire for more contemporary zoning that's simpler to understand and is more prescriptive. So we talk a lot about form-based code. I'll talk about that in a second, but we're going to just clarify that a little bit more. We're going to clarify mixed use development. You know, the people that were not excited to hear about mixed use development were generally people who equated it to be just high-rise development like the Annapolis Town Center. And it's absolutely not true. There's a whole interesting wide range of mixed use development already in the city that is by and large more compact than single use developments, like office buildings or a shopping center. So we want to point out those examples and really try to clarify the intent of mixed use, that it's really about providing flexibility as the economy changes and things like office space don't have the value they once did. We want to make sure that properties aren't vacant, which then has a lot more negative impact on a neighborhood. We want to be able to provide amenities and services that are appropriate for nearby neighborhoods. And we already have mixed use development standards in the plan that I think are going to help to make sure that we get really context sensitive development. We're going to amend two recommended actions that are related to residential zoning, LU 3.1 and LU land use 3.2. And they're going to be integrated to be kind of consistent with what we have in the housing chapter, which I'll just describe in a second. But really a lot of the form-based code, we already have some examples of it in this plan. We want to provide much clearer example of what this would look like. This is the form-based code is the kind of objective architectural standards that a lot of other places have used to guide new development to make sure it's fits with its surrounding context and reflective of neighborhood patterns that already exist. So we want to give people a better sense of what that might look like for Annapolis. We've been kind of already researching some precedents. That'll probably be both in this chapter and in the Chapter 11 development regulations. We're going to talk more about the environmental testing that's required at the Spa Road former public works site. That was one of the sites that was like the large infill potential development sites. We had identified about 12 across the city and provided some basic guidance for what makes sense on those sites in the future. So we want to be more clear about that one because it does have more challenging road ahead to kind of turn into something else. And then, the future land use map, these were sort of the major changes that we did so far based on comments that we received for the most part. Some of the park spaces that are intended to be parks in the future, they were still coded as something else from the last iteration, the future land use map. Some of the neighbors along the Spa Creek headwaters at Saltaire on Hilltop Lane, who were involved with the Spa Creek Conservancy, they identified an area that should have been environmental enhancement, and they were absolutely right. So we changed that. But yeah, just these were sort of the major changes. So in housing, we're gonna rework a number of the recommendations in this chapter, how H1.5, H1.6, H1.7, H1.9, H4.1, and H4.2. These generally refer to residential zoning recommendations, and by and large, they're all there so that the city can meet federal fair housing standards, which we haven't met in recent history, going back probably a couple of decades. So we want to be more clear about trying to meet those federal standards. We're probably not going to be as specific to residential zoning districts because frankly, we have to do more analysis to figure out where and how residential zoning could change or should change. How can we make changes that are completely compatible with existing neighborhood patterns? And frankly, we have more work to do. So we want to be clear about that. And
Can
we
you
also
give
want to be
just
clear.
a quick,
Yeah.
just a quick idea of, the flavor of those federal housing? I know that's probably a much deeper topic, but what is it about those fair housing standards that those recommended actions didn't? Can you give sort of an overview of the incongruity there?
It really comes down to too much of our city is zoned for just one type of housing, which is single family detached, or that we don't allow for even just basic duplex. That was something we tried to drive home in the narrative of this chapter, that there are a lot of common sense, basic, small apartment homes that already exist in the city, that are not legal today. We couldn't build, and that people identify them with the character of the city. We know that, from the folks we spoke with at events, that there's, concerns about whether, if the zoning changes, what is the impact on my neighborhood, et cetera. We want to make sure that there are standards in place to ensure compatibility, and we want to do it in a way that makes sense. And it's not necessarily going to be something that is applicable citywide. It may be kind of specific to certain parts of the city, but we want to do the analysis and look at how other places have done it. But yeah, it really comes down to, we have a very restrictive zoning code when it comes to residential development, and doesn't mean that we have to go to another extreme. That's the whole idea about the missing middle housing options. There's a whole wide range, and just moving the needle just a little bit would have an impact. So hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
So I mentioned the new housing map. We want to be more clear about where we already do have multifamily dwellings and other types of age-restricted housing, not necessarily affordable, but it's a very specific type of housing that we're seeing more of, and we want to be clear about where that is. We want to reinforce home ownership. That's something that isn't really in here so well, but there's a lot of folks who want to buy a house and can't afford it, and we want to incentivize creating affordable home ownership opportunities for different income levels. And then finally, we want to talk more about sustainable and resilient housing construction and really tie that into stuff that we have in the environmental sustainability chapter. Chapter 6, just three changes here. We want to do a better job clarifying the relationship between transportation policy and land use policy and housing policy. They're all interconnected, and we want to be as clear about that as possible. They influence each other. That's why we talk so much about this idea of mixed use, because ultimately you're situating people closer to, if more of the city was mixed use, people would be closer to the things they need, and in theory would be able to walk places more readily, thereby taking cars off the roads and reducing traffic and congestion. It's hard to imagine, in some parts of the city transitioning to that, but this is a long range plan. So in goal T4, which is about expanding partnerships with regional institutions, like Anne Arundel County, Maryland Department of Transportation, et cetera. We want to be much more, we have some good narrative about what the city would like to see with a new Bay Bridge span that may be coming in the near future. We want to add, we actually did not have an action related to that or recommendation. So we want to be clear about that. That was an oversight. And we're looking for something robust that services a whole range of mobility types. There's a huge opportunity with whatever happens to the Bay Bridge. And then this was a comment at the number 3 was a comment that came from the Maryland Department of Planning. There's a lot of research and development going into autonomous vehicles, connected autonomous vehicles. I don't know that we'll be seeing them in Annapolis anytime soon, but the state is trying to attract research initiatives and is doing some work on that. And they encourage us to at least discuss it and let people know that it may be coming at some point. And so we're gonna figure out a way that's appropriate to Annapolis, but I'm not sure what that's going to look like yet, but the state has done quite a bit of work to try to prepare for it.
Yeah, just sort of, this is an editorial about that, because it's something that I believe very strongly about, is that autonomous vehicles solve some problems, but they don't solve all problems, and they probably, in the end run, they don't solve a geometry problem.
Yeah.
If anything, going to make that worse. So, I'm not bullish on autonomous vehicles sort of solving all these problems. I just hope you don't go there.
Yeah.
I don't think you will, because
to be honest, I think what we'll probably just not really encourage it, not necessarily discourage it either, but just more of a wait and see type of problem. I mean, candidly, I was in San Francisco over the summer and got to see them in action, and it was kind of a mess, to be honest. I mean, they're obviously they're learning right now. It's like machine learning, but they were causing kind of a lot of chaos.
Right.
So it definitely did not get me very excited about that. And I agree. I mean, I think it's probably the least of our concerns right now in Annapolis, but Chapter 7, community facilities. We got some good comments from the Education Commission for the city. We should have reached out to more, but they gave us a lot of good comments that I think we'll be able to improve content around. And a lot of it is, we have a map in this chapter focused on school zones, and we were really only focusing on this quarter-mile walk radius around each school. But the reality is, the middle schools and the high school have much larger radius areas in terms of the catchment zone for their students and where students are coming from to get to those schools. There's no pickup bus zones.
Quarter mile doesn't cut it for elementary schools. You got to go out to a mile.
Absolutely. Yeah. They gave us all the figures. And so we're actually going to update this map to be more accurate about that, but also show potential public transit improvements that could help to offset some of the bus issues that the schools continue to face. And
since you're already here on this, and I can add it in, is working with the state highway administration in the county for their streets and roads to be crossable, because that's our biggest problem in Homewood Germantown is West Street. They just removed all this crosswalks and just put in one lit one in front of the library, and people are just still crossing the streets. And so there's other streets that need help crossing, especially the bike paths going to, we've already talked about this with Alex, but keep going. Don't let me stop you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to try to make this more robust. And this number 3, this issue of maintenance of parks. I mean, it's a big deal. I think as a city, we're going to have to transition to a different model of maintenance. You know, I think particularly with this current administration that we have, you know, it's been very focused on improving our parks and our trails, and we're going to be adding a lot of new amenities that are going to have to be maintained. And we want to get the conversation started in this comprehensive plan about how we can best do that, how we can leverage resources. Other cities have dealt with the same issue. And we do have the funds to do a citywide parks and recreation master plan. And that's typically where a consultant drills down into how much money do we need to maintain these parks to a level of standard that we want, and where's that money going to come from, and are there ways of generating more revenue, and how much staff do we need, are there efficiencies, et cetera. But it's just a big, it's a big topic that we want to make sure is on people's radar. And then we want to talk about adequate public facilities for public safety got updated in the last year. I mean, we want to update that. It seems like a minor thing to, in a way, but it's actually, it has a lot of consequence on development, and it's just a hot topic, obviously. Policing and alternatives to policing, and et cetera. Arts and culture, mentioned already, we're going to rename this chapter to Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation. We have a lot of emphasis in this chapter on diversity and inclusion. We want to be more clear that, and there's a lot of emphasis on African-American history in the city as we look to expand preservation initiatives outside of the historic district. But when it comes to not just historic preservation, but arts and culture initiatives, we want to be more explicit about strategies to engage and represent and get participation from other underrepresented communities, Hispanic community, for example. And then this is kind of specific, number 3, but we have a recommendation about partnering with Maryland Hall to launch a campus master plan. There's a lot of field space that's heavily used around the Bates. It's the Bates Athletic Complex. But there's a lot of other sort of awkward spaces between Bates and Maryland Hall and the athletic fields. And we wanted to be clear. I think people worried that we were trying to develop buildings on these. Those are the most heavily used fields in the city. The intent is not to develop those as, new structures, but how to activate some of the space and link it together better. That was kind of the intent. You have the Chesapeake Children's Museum, which is just across Spa Creek. It's another large city-owned property. And so there's a lot of need to tie everything together in that area. Getting towards the end here, Chapter 9, Environmental Sustainability. This is a big one. We heard a lot of feedback about, we had a 50% urban tree canopy goal. That's 50% of the city's total land area. That was in our last comprehensive plan. It said we were going to reach 50% by 2036. When we kind of dug into the data, it found that we really hadn't put a dent in that in 12 years. We were still at the same 41% that we were back then. And
Probably lost some.
Yeah, well, we lost some. We kind of went up and then we went down. And we actually, we haven't gotten the figures for what happened during COVID. And so we actually anticipate that when you look at like 20 to 2023, we may even be under 40. So we were trying to be more realistic and say, well, 45% is like, there was a study done in 2006 here that basically found that 45% is the minimum to get quality stream conditions, high water quality. If you're looking to plant along the creek corridors, particularly. But, people want us to be more ambitious. And I think the message that the City Council has received from the discussion about this is that we need far more resources to get to this goal. And we have a very inadequate, we have one person, urban forester, you mentioned him, Ben, earlier, Brian Adams. I mean, he has almost no budget to plant trees. So he's kind of begging and pleading for anything he can get. And so I think the City Council is listening on that. And we gave them some examples. I was just at the Environmental Matters Committee today and shared a presentation specifically about tree canopy goals. And I foresee this becoming a bigger topic in the next budget. We're going to add a section on environmental justice, which it's kind of implied in a lot of what we have here. We just don't use that term much, which is an oversight, and we want to be more clear about that. We did complete a big study with the Navy and Anne Arundel County and the state called the Military Installation Resilience Response Study just last year. And it looked at all of our critical infrastructure assets that, frankly, the Navy needs to stay in Annapolis. But it sort of, because it was focused on Navy, it looked at the wider region, and so inherently focused on Annapolis as well. So it looked at water treatment facilities, evacuation routes, flood-prone areas, energy systems, and it's a very robust document. It just got wrapped up, less than 6 months ago. So we want to include that in here, reference it. And then finally, sustainable building practices that were mentioned in the housing chapter. We want to tie that, be more clear about that here. There is a building, green building section already, but it's not very specific about it. It doesn't really look forward. It's just kind of reinforcing what we already do. So this is the last sort of major element of the plan, water resources. And these were just two specific comments that came to us from the Maryland Department of Planning, to basically be more clear about what is our capacity allocation for future population growth that we foresee. And I've already reached out to my cohort in Public Works who manages the drinking water, and she gave me all the information. I mean, we already do this, so it's a little bit just trivial, but we need to show it, and I think it's a good suggestion. So we'll do that for drinking water and for sewer capacity. And these are just basically tables.
And that's for all the growth scenarios that were.
It is. It's looking at the population growth, household growth. So it's not necessarily looking at the type of housing or development, but just strictly the number of people we're looking to add, and doesn't necessarily look at where it's going to happen either. It's more just like citywide growth, and so that's, the wells are located in multiple places. So, but
it covers the four different, all of
Yes.
the four different growth scenarios.
yes,
Yeah,
it does.
okay.
Yeah. So chapter 11 is development regulations. This is sort of the section of the plan that talks about implementation. We are going to add more information about adequate public facilities and clarify any potential future change. I mean, there's already you all are going to be seeing soon a revision to that chapter, that chapter of the city code that city manager's office hired a consultant to kind of clarify and clean up, but it doesn't look too much into the future. And so the adequate public facilities section that we would add here is going to be looking at things that we need to maybe anticipate in the future. And then kind of related to that, waterfront development should be talked about here. It's just been a hot topic, particularly related to public water access. And it's surprising, one thing that came out of the Maritime Task Force was this idea that, if we were to allow more restaurants to be on the waterfront, and there's a need for that, there's definitely a demand that they should provide some kind of unconditional public access. And, we came up with a definition. I think Bob was on that task force, and we came up with a definition for what that basic public water access should be for any new restaurant on the waterfront. And so that kind of points to, well, we probably should have something similar for any development over a certain size. I mean, that's how you start to link together waterfront and potentially have public walkways that, the kind of things that a lot of other coastal cities have that we really don't have much of. So I think we can be much more specific about that. Even though, we did just update our maritime zoning not too long ago. So these are the last two. Thanks for your patience. Areas of critical state concern. I mentioned it earlier, but we're going to add another map here related to the Chesapeake Crossroads Heritage Area, which provides a lot of funding for preservation and cultural projects in Annapolis. And then in the recommended action matrix, there were some comments about questions about how we're going to fund all of this. And every recommendation has a different scenario, but there's definitely, certain ways of funding things that are going to cut across. There's different options, and we want to be clear about, a lot of the recommendations, frankly, just rely on staff time, not necessarily outside funding or capital budget or anything like that. But and then we're going to add another section that's about, how do we monitor implementation that is really, I think in that, we do have a requirement to send an annual report to the state. We want to be clear about the things that are already in place that we have to do, and maybe give some people some confidence that we're going to be looking at this thing year by year and seeing how we're doing. So that's it. The next steps, assuming this all makes sense to the commission, we think we need 4 to 6 weeks to make these changes, and then hope to come back to you with the new material. It may not be sort of in that clean formatted shape, but new text, some updated maps, et cetera, in some format that we can share with you. And then ideally we have a approved draft plan from the Planning Commission that we can pass along to City Council in January for them to start their adoption process. So that's what we're envisioning here. I'm happy to take questions.
Yes, so any, we've asked a few questions along the way. Any of the commissioners have either specific or overall questions for Eric on what he's presented?
Can we make some comments?
Please do.
There should be questions. Well, first of all, I think, good. You're picking up on some of the weak points and looking to emphasize some of the other things that need to be emphasized. It's good. I mean, clearly the feedback has been listened to, and it's been productive. Let me make a couple of comments if I could. Let me start with Chapter 3, Municipal Growth. Fostering inclusive economic opportunities. In other words, opening things up. One of the comments that I heard over and over and over again as I've been working on city doc stuff is that a lot of the population of the city feels like there's nothing there for them. And so as you write that section, I think one possibility is to include the suggestion that the city dock programming be opened up to allow more small scale entrepreneurs, carts, kiosks. I'm not quite sure how else to do it. But what's really happened downtown is that, it's become a franchise city.
Yeah.
And there's not an opportunity for the African-American or the Hispanic American communities to, you start anything. And if somebody could have a little cart or a kiosk to do something, those kinds of things will make, well.
You already can do that though through a permit process and do those things.
Yeah, but you can't.
You're talking like a fixed area, like a open air market area or something?
You have guys like somebody who wants to do a snow cone stand, and do traditional, Central American snow cones. Sven Storm will raise a storm.
No, that's
I
a
don't want
really
20
good
food
comment.
trucks on the city
Really
dock
good.
either,
Excuse me?
I don't want 20 food trucks on the city dock either.
No, I'm not talking food trucks. I'm talking about small scale stuff that they should be thinking about on the city dock to provide more opportunities for more people. Very small scale.
The
Basically
city
reducing
can be
friction.
very heavy handed in that,
Reducing friction for small scale things. That's ultimately what the issue is.
Excuse me?
Reducing friction to allow small scale things.
Yeah, there is friction, but
There's a lot of friction.
there's and that's the kind of thing we need to address. There's just not a lot of opportunities for the quote underrepresented populations, to get things going, to sell things off the back of a pickup truck, to do all kinds of little small scale businesses. Anyway, it was something that the two things come together in my mind: opportunities and city dock, and that a recommendation to really consider how to make those opportunities, how to make city dock as a place for opportunities for more than just landlords. Take it for what it's worth. In terms of land use, yeah, I think that it's one of the themes of land use and mixed use and multifamily housing and all of those themes really revolve around, and compatibility with existing areas all revolve around, frankly, as far as I understand it, is the use of form-based codes in some very important and select areas to start off with. And they need to be illustrated, what form-based code means, what it's meant in places where it's been instituted. I don't know. It's almost like a subsection that needs to be explained. I never thought that graphic of how do I describe this graphic? You took a city block and you said, well, here you can do one thing with it on one way with the use-based code, and then there's on the other hand is like what it could look like. I mean, it's sort of useful, but I think that more needs to be done. We're going to be asking the city and the council to embrace this, and of course they're going to need to be educated, and this is the place to start. So I hope that it's more than just in passing that you'll be mentioning it. Examples of form-based code applicable to Annapolis. I think that I think if you took a couple of test cases in a sense and showed, and not just West Annapolis. I mean, we've all seen that thing. We've all seen the 3 different areas that have been decided upon, but we need to see some specific. What does it mean to be in one of those areas? What would be allowed? What kinds of things would be allowed with a form-based code, and what wouldn't be allowed? What would be excused? What would be prohibited in residential area, like an R2, when you're talking multifamily housing, what would be allowed and what wouldn't be allowed. I think those are the kinds of very straightforward examples which people need to see in order to embrace it. Moving down to housing, that first paragraph, clarify that objective standards will be needed with zoning changes to ensure compatibility. I've just addressed that. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Transportation, you talk about you talk about autonomous vehicles. Well, they're pretty far off in the future, but right in front of our noses are e-bikes. I mean, I have seen, I don't know, probably a 4-fold increase in e-bikes just along Poplar Avenue. And I expect to see more once we turn Poplar Park into a bike highway. So I think that one of the ways to talk about transportation, reducing car use, multimodal is to point out that if there are better bike lanes, you're going to have e-bikes, and e-bikes means people not getting into a car to go to the grocery store. I want to applaud you and the city in general on getting that $250,000 grant to design a bike passage from Eastport to Quiet Waters, which in a sense is Eastport to the Bay Ridge Giant shopping center as well. Right. So that's a hugely important leg in the whole, in the whole tree, that's not the right metaphor, but it's a hugely important section, that Bay Ridge. And I could see many people, using e-bikes, because people who wouldn't bike use an e-bike because it's easier, but it's a vehicle and it goes 15 to 20 miles an hour. So I would add that to that multimodal or whatever section it is in transportation. Going to community facilities, number 3, about maintenance, you're absolutely right. It's an issue which is not going to appear in the future. It's in front of us. If you walk around many of the parks, you'll see all sorts of trees that are becoming just covered with vines, and our parks maintenance people are not trained. They don't work hard enough to get onto these things. And you're right, we really need to focus on how to maintain our community, our city-owned resources. Poplar Park is an excellent example of what's going to be needed in terms of maintenance, because, well, anyway, I don't need to go into the specifics. I can't applaud you more for focusing on that as a future need, which is basically in front of us in the present. Environmental sustainability, tree canopy. Well, I think there was an off-the-record discussion before this meeting began about tree cutting on West Street, and Ben brought us a lot of bad news about what was going on there. Here's a couple of potential specific suggestions. Significantly increase penalties and make some of those penalties mandatory minimums for tree cutting without permits. Instead of poor Brian Adams running from pillar to post and then getting under pressure to not impose fines on people. But if he finds that there's been a violation, it's not going to be up to poor Brian to decide, oh, well, okay, we'll make it a $25 penalty. No, if you're cutting a tree with a 2-foot diameter, you've got a 250, 300, whatever, you need to set significant, and in some cases, mandatory minimums, and take the pressure off the poor, city employee. And also with respect to trees, there was a comment in the current draft of the plan about cooperating with the school system to look at the school properties to become potential repositories for reforestation or opportunities for reforestations. Now, there's a couple of kind of angles and consequences to that. Well, first of all, school properties are really recreational properties in many ways. Okay, it's owned by the school systems. They decide what happens between, 8 and 3. But really what happens the rest of the time is that they're general community-wide recreational facilities. They're not being maintained well, and they are a great opportunity for reforestation. But in each of those cases, Annapolis Middle, Germantown, Bates, I'm trying to think of some other places which are significant, there will require master planning and a tremendous amount of cooperation with the school system. And it's a kind of a thing that would need to happen at the highest levels first to get buy-in. But that's what school properties are. They're general community recreational facilities. They need master planning, and they need, there are those opportunities for reforestation, and they will need maintenance plans as part of the master planning. But I think that that's a tremendous opportunity for expanding our recreational facilities and making them really better at not a whole lot of costs. When you talk about where is it going down further down, development regulations, waterfront development, chapter 11, and you talk about, well, if somebody does a big waterfront development, maybe we should require that there be public access. Yes, right, exactly. I mean, it was a big issue during the maritime rezoning. What I'm afraid is that the horses left the stable a good while ago. And that horse is called, it's got a big brand on its butt, and that brand says SAYC. And I mean, you can put it in, and I think you're right, but point out to me what large significant waterfront development is going to happen. Nonetheless, it should get into the code, and just in case things do begin to happen over the next 20 years where things are redeveloped, stuff is torn down, and new things are added. Yes, we need to be able to get to the water, and that the requirements and prohibitions need to be put into place now rather than too late after the horses fled the barn and the barn is burned down. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Mostly quite congratulatory to the work that you've done.
Thank you.
Others have comments they'd like to share?
Ms. Pico, what do you think about the city dock issue and about enhancing opportunities, opening opportunities?
Yeah, I think as always, you and I are very much aligned in our initial assessments. I shared most of my feedback in the last meeting and in my comments that we were drafting up in response to the plan in general. As far as the goals in the plan when it comes to city dock, I think there's always room for opportunities. I think that the goals here should be, higher. That we talked about this before about not having to refined or granular specific items, but I think the areas you touched on, could prove useful. But to be honest, I haven't really delved on the city dock specific, other than the city dock plan that's currently active, not necessarily in this comprehensive plan for future use.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Alex, what happened to the work that some of us did in terms of specific sections? Whatever happened?
So we have all that, and I'm still
Given to Eric?
Yeah, I've had
yeah.
them since your last meeting. Yeah.
So some of that, as Eric mentioned, is reflected in maybe
Okay.
the language that he used in the updates that he presented. I recognize some words that I had made and and others had made, as Eric mentioned, I recognize that language, at least not verbatim, but in flavor, in the updates. So, you know, I would echo a lot of the same comments that Bob made, and thank you for those very in-depth comments. I agree with all of that, and the maintenance piece was especially important to me, because, you know, with a lot of new amenities, you know, if we can't maintain them, you know, it's not going to look good for us if we add a lot of stuff that we can't deal with. That's a long-term liability. So, you know, one of the things that I would suggest that we do is, and this is what was one of the goals of Eric coming back and presenting those changes to us, is that there's nothing really to vote on per se, but I would make a motion that we endorse the changes that Eric has made, because I from what I've heard from everybody here, I think that's the direction we're going. But I would entertain a motion to endorse that, and which basically says we like the direction, and then for them to go off and make those changes and bring us back the document. And then, as you mentioned, the pieces that we've already prepared, along with some other inputs from other commissioners that we haven't seen yet, you know, that's going to be still very valid for us to continue to put that together, because I think it's, you know, some of those comments are still very, very valid even with the changes, because, you know, at least a lot of the comments that I made were things about that I liked about the plan that only get better with the changes.
Yeah.
So I think that work we've done is still sort of sitting in the hopper for us to continue to work on and refine down into our final recommendation based on the plan that Eric brings back. But at this point, I think as a wrap up from this discussion and Eric bringing back these changes to us, would somebody make a motion to endorse these changes? I'd be willing to do that.
I'll easily make that motion.
Okay, and do we have a second?
I'll second.
And any discussion on that? Is there perhaps any further direction we would give to staff to beyond what we've already done? And if not, I think we could I could call for a vote to approve this motion to endorse the changes and have the staff go off and implement those. So all in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any abstentions or nays? Okay, well, thank you. I think that
Mr. Chair, before we disband, I'd like to ask a question. Eric said that he would like to be back in 4 to 6 weeks, which
yeah.
puts us
So let's
middle of
hold on
November.
just a second, because I want to talk about under new business.
beginning of
Talk
December.
about schedule and going back to in-person meetings. Just kind of wrap those two together. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
It would be fine with me.
Okay, all right. So Eric, you know, thank you again for bringing all that to us, and
Yeah.
you know, so we have this voted on approved motion to approved endorsement of the changes that you brought to us. So thank you again, and
I
you know, we
appreciate
look
that.
forward to seeing.
Thank you.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing, you know, the draft. So you think, so getting onto this new business, that really the schedule over the next really January and
November.
the rest of October, November, and December. So we have one more meeting in October, which is next week, and we're going to have the continuation of this public hearing on 22-23. Hopefully that won't take very long. And then our combined work session with Historic Preservation Commission, the work session on City Dock. So we'll be meeting with the with the folks, Eileen Fogarty and company, to go over those plans in an informal work session. So that closes out October. November. So Eric, you think you would bring back this essentially final draft? Maybe not, maybe not pretty and all I's dotted, T's crossed formatting, but at least content wise, in what time frame?
The 16th, your meeting on the 16th would be the soonest.
Okay.
16th
of November.
It's a little ambitious, but November 16th, I think, is because you're meeting on the 2nd, I think on the 16th. So, December 7th would be more comfortable, but I do really want to sort of keep the momentum here, so we can aim for the 16th.
Yeah, let's do that, and that'll leave November 16th and December 7th for discussion of that that updated document. And
that sounds good.
Yeah, and so we'll just sort of block those two dates for discussion of the updated comp plan and hopefully, yeah, Bob.
December 7th, are we already running into midnight madnesses?
I don't know the schedule of that. It's possible.
So if we're thinking about
That is, they're all Midnight Madnesses, all the Thursdays, the first 3 Thursdays in December. It's Midnight Madness 2, and then 11th hour.
all right, so
And then usually the first Midnight Madness is also the mayor's open house too.
Well, put a pin. Yeah, put a pin in that in terms of conflict of the room, which I don't think we'll have. But yeah, I mean that's a.
Yeah, I won't be available that day.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's looking like the 16th, Eric. You got a strong bogey to.
right, because
to
then
go
you,
to.
right, and then you start running into all this Christmas holiday stuff,
yeah,
and it gets
exactly.
put into January, and so unfortunately, okay, got it.
Yeah, we'll
Guy.
do our best to get to the 16th.
Yeah,
Well-
I mean, I'm really hoping that we can, once you get us that plan, we can, we can work on our recommendations offline. The writing and the that doesn't have to happen in a public meeting. Frankly, it's very awkward to do that in a public meeting, just because it's cumbersome. So,
Are you thinking of trying to meet in person on November 16th?
so I think we're sort of done for schedule wise. So that's the other topic. Is when to come back in person. So as you guys are aware, I had a long talk with Mr. Jakubiak about my insistence that it went that way. But I think, in retrospect, I think we all needed to talk because we all have, especially around the holidays, have calendars that are planned with travel and that kind of stuff. So maybe, I mean, certainly I know I had planned on doing some meetings remotely. So that's the thing I wanted to ask you guys about, like, what are your schedules and when do you, what's a good planning horizon for you for us all to say, okay, we're gonna, our calendars are open, that we can start booking those meetings in person. And my feeling on that was after the first of the year, because I think things, I don't know about everybody else, but my plans for the next couple months in terms of travel and family and holidays and stuff are pretty much done at this point. And so I think if anybody else is in my situation, probably after the first of the year is the best opportunity for us to get back face to face.
One of the things I want to point out is that if we receive this final draft on the 16th, and we can get it in and out in one night if we're meeting in person. But if we're not meeting in person, then it gets booted over into this, this weird December Thursday night land. And
I mean,
then
I don't know what, I don't know how that
that's one of the
happens.
arguments. That's one of the arguments for coming in person on November the 16th.
I mean, we could have, I guess I'm not quite sure what it is that would happen in person that we couldn't do remotely.
Well, for one thing, if it's remote and it's an open public hearing, then we need to boot it.
It's not a public hearing. It's just our,
Not a public hearing
deliberations.
on our.
No, no, the public hearings on the comp plan are all that's done. The rest of the business on the comp plan is just our deciding what we're gonna, getting the input from staff, the update, and deciding amongst ourselves, how
Okay.
how we're gonna prepare our recommendation to city council. And that doesn't, we can do some of that remotely, but I think a lot of that's gonna happen, asynchronously, as we write that, draft that recommendation. We're not going to do that in a meeting. We're going to do that all the way we draft stuff, sort of asynchronously. So
How do you envision a recommendation, that it's going to be a written recommendation?
yeah, I mean, the way we always do things.
Some length,
Excuse me?
at some length?
At some length, yeah. I mean, we talked about that in a prior meeting, and I think we have a lot of material, that.
Well, then now you're talking about getting stuff done in December,
That's fine, but
but you're not going to be here.
we can work, I mean, I'm here a lot of it, but we can work on that asynchronously. We don't have to work on that meeting on a Thursday night. We're going to work on drafting, as we do many of these things. Somebody's going to sit down, write some stuff. Another person's going to write some stuff. We'll all look at it. We'll synthesize it. The way you draft a recommendation. We're going to have to do that offline.
Okay.
It's a little bit more complicated here because we're reviewing and coming up with a recommendation on a 400-page document versus a piece of legislation, that's a little bit more single faceted.
I want to make sure that, our work is given to Mr. Lashinsky in a box with a big red ribbon so that he can open it either before or on Christmas Day.
I think that would be fine. I mean, we could have, I think we should have one meeting in December that we have hopefully a final product, or maybe it's the first meeting in January where we have a document that we are all comfortable with, that we vote on in our public meeting to approve these recommendations that we all agree, or whatever, we take a vote and on what we've prepared, and that we could do all of that leading up to the meeting in January and put it out there and vote on it. And that's because you really, Eric, you want to get this to city council in January, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That would be the goal.
I mean, ideally, if we could do that and have a meeting, the first week in December with a, a final draft of a recommendation, that's certainly possible. It's going to require, a lot of effort on all of our part to get it done by then, but it's possible. So, I mean, we don't have to decide that now, but we've had a lot to think about here.
Mhm.
But I wanted other people's feedback on when are you, schedule wise and based on all of your personal plans for November, December, when do you think you're ready schedule wise to come back and go in person. And again, once we go back in person, we go back to one meeting a month, the way everything was before COVID. And
Well, we
my
often met-
my proposal was
We
in
often
January.
met twice a month in person, depending on what work we had to get done.
Yeah, it was primarily once a month with a second meeting if we got really jammed up. But this idea of holding public meetings open over 2 meetings, that was something that was an artifact of doing our meetings remotely. So we would dispense with that process and going back to, you know, on something like the 022-23 legislation as an example, we'd have a public hearing, we'd open it, we'd hear from the public, we'd close it, we'd deliberate, come up with a recommendation. We do all that in one night. And we have not done that since we've gone remotely, but the idea of going back in person is that we can go back to completing that process, certainly on things that are not particularly complicated. We could go back to getting that all done in one night and not being required to hold a public hearing open spanning 2 meetings. That was really often the reason that we would have 2 meetings a month, is because that requirement to hold the public hearing open basically doubled the number of meetings we had to do.
Yeah, we rarely had 2 meetings before COVID.
I mean,
And then
every once in a while-
the thought about the COVID was
Yeah.
that we wouldn't have 4-hour meetings, we'd have 2 2-hour meetings. Because nobody wanted to be online for 4 hours on a Zoom call.
Right. So anyway, we'll go back to, you know, we'll go back to the future. And, you know, if we get jammed up because we get a lot of applications or complex things to work on, then maybe we'll have to have 2 meetings a month occasionally, as we did in the past. So you know, we don't have to.
So
vote on
answering your
anything, but-
answering your question from me, you know, we've gone through this every year about Midnight Madness. We've always said we're not going to schedule a meeting on Midnight Madness because of the mayor's open house and because of the fact that there's no parking downtown in the garages and people don't want to come to a planning commission meeting when Midnight Madness is going on. So we had decided, and sometimes we had done like a Wednesday night if we could schedule Wednesday night. We had done in the past, and we found another night to do it. I would prefer that we did not do Thursday nights in December. However, I cannot be there for the first one. I can be there for the other ones if we have it in person. Otherwise, I'm fine with whatever.
Well,
My
I think
recommendation would be that we transition in beginning of the year. It allows us, 90 days of announcements and changes and testing and dry runs and whatever else we need. It also allows us to solidify a firm calendar for 2024, where those dates are set, at least the monthly, on a date and time where we get full quorum. So at least it's confirmed a year out. And so if it is in person, the ability to attend remote, because I'm not sure if they allow commissioners to attend both.
No, so once we go back
Exactly.
in person, they will, we will not have a remote option for some.
Exactly.
commissions. It's
So those
usually all
dates, having a year, their 90 days of finalizing a calendar, coming to a consensus and getting that locked down would be great.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that was my sense. So others have a feeling about that of basically advertising that we're going to go back face to face in the next calendar year.
That's fine.
I
No,
have no problem with whatever you want to do. Make a decision. I'm for it.
Okay, well, that was my thought too. So I think that's what we'll do. And I'll work with staff to make sure we get the proper notifications and advertising that our first meeting in January, we will be back to in person.
Think of all the fossil fuels we'll burn going downtown. Maybe I should jog down there. If anybody needs to, I do. Come on, David, join me.
I'm going to be creating.
I'm coming in a different direction.
I'm going to be creating CO2 from breathing hard riding my bike down there. So I don't know about you guys. Anyway.
That's funny.
Yeah, I can ride my bike down there too. Yeah, let's not have it Thursday nights. I want to go to one of those bike parties.
Yeah, well,
They're always on Thursday nights.
The third Thursday of the month, so that frees that up. Yes, I've missed them all in the last 4 months or something, so. Okay, well, I think that takes us to the end of the new business. And if there's anything, unless there's anything else with the good or the order, I would entertain a motion to adjourn tonight.
I'll make that motion for adjournment.
I will second that.
All righty, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you all very